This is the sixth and final part of the no-till module. We're going to talk a bit about here about converting your old trash worker to a no-till planter. What sort of things you need to look for, and what machines could you use, what machines can't you use, and the adapters and points and things that come with that, press wheels, etc. So if you've got a machine that's suitable, we're going to talk about some of those sort of adaptations that you can buy yourself and put on and convert yourself to no-till. We're also going to look at some other bits and pieces of machinery that you can add on to your gear. They're very cheap options that can really help you get through the stubbles. Also, we're just going to finish with some inter-row sewing tips. Inter-row sewing is such a fantastic new technology that we're using with guidance and control traffic and no-till. How do you actually do it, and what are some of the other bits of technology that are out there that can help you do this? Trash worker adaptations. Most of the time you can just get these bolt-on adapters. Everyone's seen these from Keach, haven't they? There's other companies that sell them, like Great Western and stuff like that. You can go and get those. Seen those? The points that I like, we talked about the Peter point yesterday. It seems to be very successful and lots of people really like that. These Keach points, I don't prefer Keach or anything, but I just see people use a lot of Keach gear, and some people have issues with it, but I think it's pretty good and reliable. There's only 2 points that I reckon you need. This beak, the spear point, and this what I call snub nose. I don't know what other people call it. But that snub nose one is just beautiful for deep sewing and dry conditions. It just busts away all that, like you get that brickiness sometimes, just below the surface. You've got to bust that away. It does a really good job, whereas the beak point's much better for wet conditions, I find. And then obviously you need press wheels behind all that. Three obvious options is in frame, on the tine, or ganged at the back. Obviously, in that order, obviously preferable to have the press wheel as close as possible to the tine itself is the best way of going. That way you're pressing that wet soil first before the dry soil comes in. That's where the gangs can sometimes be a problem. You get dry soil falling in as well, and it gets a bit mixed up, and therefore the seed's not really in nice wet soil. But if you've got a machine that's got limited in-frame capabilities, then you've got to go ganged. This is one of my guys down south just converting an old trash worker. I think it's an old AFM or something. Just putting the gang at the back there as a simple conversion. I mean, it's still not a cheap thing to do, but if you've got a trash worker or an old, like a John Deere or a shearer, it's a great option just to get it going. Good for winter crop planting. This guy here's just got some old second-hand ones and adapted them, put them on, got a new set of points, and there's a cheap way of doing it that someone else didn't want, and he's up and away. I guess the thing about press wheels is there's as many different press wheels as there are points. But, I mean, the most popular ones I see are the V or the flat. Those style are the most popular. Still a few people buying these. Excel still offer these wider ones, these semi-pneumatics. So the zero pressure one here is semi-pneumatic. The flat and the V ones there are obviously solids. But we had a guy yesterday who was still using the rib ones and was quite happy with them. Again, semi-pneumatic, so they will have a bit of stretch. I don't see many people buying them new anymore, though. I definitely don't see them come on a new planter. But if someone's had those, I think they're called the Lindsay Ward types, and they've probably still got them from 30 years ago, 20 years ago. You seeing many people with those? No, more the Vs and the flat types. But the most important thing is matching the point to the press wheel. So if it's too wide and you've got a narrow point, you're going to get pressure on the outside. You're not going to get that trench pushed properly. Whereas if it goes the other way and you've got a wide point and narrow press wheel, you might never even get to press the seed properly. So it's really about matching those points and press wheels up. And it probably doesn't have to be to the millimetre, but if you've got a narrow point, use a narrow press wheel, and try and match up the millimetres, the widths of that equally. some people are a bit worried about like a narrow press wheel, narrow point, having a big trench, but I think that's actually good in sloping ground. It actually keeps that water in that furrow. We'll talk about layout later, but it just keeps that water in that furrow. Until atrazine washes in there with chickpeas. No, you've got to be careful of, that's true. You actually got to be careful of residual products, and that has caused big problems in the past. There's some press wheel pressures. Now these are only sort of my opinion, so I guess a big disclaimer is that you put enough pressure on to do the job at the time. So we're trying to get an inch of wet soil over the seed that's pressed firmly, that's got no air spaces, right? But there's some sort of rough recommended pressures that you can increase pressures quite a bit in some of those tighter soils. But not that you're growing a canola up here, but be careful of things like legumes and you don't crack the seed. It's funny, I go down south and they've never even talked about press wheel pressures, whereas it's sort of common to talk about press wheel pressure in Queensland. I find that funny. They have no idea what press wheel pressures they run or what they should be running. But I've actually run even more than 15 kilos one year in deep sowing sorghum. We're very chunky, come up very blocky, and we couldn't put enough pressure on it. Just simply could not wind up the spring hard enough to get seed soil contact. So it depends on the conditions at the time and what you're trying to do. But yeah, I think that's the trouble with some of those other lighter press wheels. They just can't get enough down pressure on them. And the other problem with gang is if you put too much pressure on the back on the gang press wheels, it can actually lift the machine out of the ground. So you be careful of that as well. Other useful things that I see people using is, we talked about trash whippers before, but they sort of work. They're a 50% job sort of thing. They're useful to have, but they don't work all the time. Some people even use them to try and flick dirt away. But generally, and there's a lot of different brands. That one there is actually interlinking. You see that? Sometimes they run away and sometimes they interlink, depending on how you adjust them. But this is an Argentinian photo, but I actually saw some of these discs the other day. You can buy these in Australia, but that's a fluted coulter, which I'm not a big fan of in the north. I do prefer to use a straight coulter, but you can buy coulters afterwards to cut through very serious stubble amounts. I mean, that's Argentinian stubble levels, and it does a good job. Covering chains, about 1.5 meters a chain there. It's the cheapest insurance package you could ever buy. It works just a treat just to pull that loose, rubbly, dry dirt back in to stop that baking. And it's amazing the amount of people up here that I find that aren't using them. I said, why aren't you using covering chains? Never heard of them. I thought in your summer plantings you get baking all the time, but some people get away with it. But it's very common practice to use covering chains. I assume most people have heard of diffusers. Yep. I recommend these. Some people get away with not using them, but I strongly recommend them just to take the air out. So you can up your air rates to make sure you don't get as many blockages, and they've got to be about 350 mils above the seed tube where you're going to drop, just so that the air's right out of them and the seed will drop. I find them pretty good. Offset. This photo was Bob Matheson's old photo. Yeah, but just simple. Well, that's actually a bit more complicated to change, but inter-row sowing. I mean, that was done before there was any guidance systems ever developed. So it used to inter-row sow in 12-inch with no guidance system. So you can do it. This is one from down south, but even simpler. Or even just pushing a hitch across. Same people do that as well. Just to inter-row sow on trailing gear while you're staying on your wheel tracks. That's the biggest thing. It's about just not moving off your wheel tracks. I guess the other option is multiple hitch points, and this is common on 3-point linkage. If you buy a 3-point linkage planter, get them to get multiple hitch points on there. And this guy's only got 2 hitch points, so he can offset inter-row sow on this machine. This is an XL single disc again. He then has a little, where your air seeder pull is, you just got a little ratchet there just to make it easier to move across. Undo those 4 bolts, ratchet it across so that your air seeder pulls in line, because you don't want to move your planter and then have your air seeder not pulling straight. It'll pull the seeder around. So he just does that, and then on the tine he just adds another one on one side, because he's a bit more worried about row spacing than we are up here. Because if you shift it, offset it, you're obviously going to have a wide and a narrow guest row across the paddock. But I don't think we worry too much about that in Queensland, Northern New South Wales. But this is in Victoria. That's what he does, is just adds another tine on the other end, and then to make that row spacing work a bit better. The other option is to have your AB lines and then have a nudge function, which then just nudges all your AB lines across. But that's probably less than ideal, and in irrigation, in furrow irrigation, it's impossible. But that's what most people end up doing, is just nudging their AB line. You get deep wheel tracks, it's impossible, because you have poor old guidance systems trying to climb out of a trench all day. Another option is this, which just about no one's heard of, and the reason it's named X-bar is this 8-inch bar, and it's got these gussets on them. You can see it in the photo there, the gusseting. That's why it's got its name, the X-bar. But it's one solid bar with no reinforcement except these gussets. And the clamping, you can see the clamp, the yellow clamp, it's got that pattern. It just clamps around the bar, and in between the two there is just one nut. You rattle it off and you shift that anywhere along the bar, you light and rattle it back up again. It's a bloody brilliant idea, and it's got heaps of strength. He's done 12-metre bar like that. You can get it folding if you wanted. Obviously on here they run an oil line along the top there as well, but you basically everything, like your distributor heads are all on that same pattern. There it is there. So he just clamps everything to each side of the bar, and you've got complete flexibility about your row spacing then.